Good morning, church. Good to see everybody this morning. We're glad that you're here, despite the frogs croaking outside. The rain coming down. We're glad that you're here. Know that it took a little extra effort this morning, and we're thankful that you've made that effort to be here with us to encourage us, one another, as we worship God in spirit and in truth. For most of you, either Wednesday night or this morning when you came in, I handed you something that looks like this. It's just cream, envelope, and an invitation. I gave you two. If you did not get your two, please be sure and get your two as you leave. Now, let me tell you what it is, and let me also tell you this. And we have fifth Sundays. We have, as the kids call it now, Church Eat Church. That's been a standard tradition here at River Road for years and years, and that's a wonderful tradition to have. The elders decided that this year, for March, for the fifth Sunday, we would have Friends and Family Day. We've been having those along the way, and we always want to have a building full of friends and family and loved ones and folks we like and folks that we like them because we love the Lord and want to see them follow the Lord. But we have to invite people. They have to know. And so that's what this is. This is an invitation. If you want to write a note in it, you can, but you can send it to your friend and let them know that they're invited to our Friends and Family Day. Now, two things. If you can't afford a stamp, don't want to pay for a stamp, don't like to pay for stamps, whatever the reason being, it doesn't matter. You can give it to me and I'll put a stamp on it for you. So if you want to send out 20, and see, that's the second part of this. Granted, you get two to begin with, but there's plenty out there in the foyer, and we can always make more because these are those that we make. And so we can make more. And if you want to send 20 and you just say, I can't afford 20, I can send 10. And if you'll send 10, I'll be glad to send 10 for you. And so just give them to me and I'll put a stamp on them and put them in the mailbox for you. And we'll go at it like that. But anyway, pick up some of those and be sure to invite your friends and invite your family. Come and be with us that day and enjoy the partaking of the Word of God and also, of course, the Lord's Supper, but then the food together and spending time in fellowship one with another. It has been attributed to Ben Franklin that he said there are two things that are sure in life: death and taxes. In many ways, Ben Franklin was right, but also Ben missed one. There are three things in life to which we can be assured: death, taxes, and criticism. We're going to be criticized from time to time. People are going to say things to us that they thought were more correct. We could have done something better. We could have done something instead of. We were wrong. Now, admittedly, they'll think that they'll say, well, that wasn't really a criticism. That was a help. No, it was a criticism. It was a criticism, and you justifying it or trying to justify it as a help. But the fact is that we do face criticism. You walk outside the door of your house, you face criticism. You may not even have to walk outside the door of your house to face criticism. Criticism comes from all different people and all different stretches of life. As we continue our series of lessons on everyday problems, today we look at criticism. If you don't think that it's unusual to get criticism, Jesus was criticized. Think about his hometown was criticized. Jesus was criticized for doing some good deed on the Sabbath. Jesus was also criticized because of where he came from, but also his association. Remember, it said that he associated with, that he fellowshiped with, that he ate with the publicans and sinners. And folks criticized him. They criticized his teachings. They criticized his hometown. They criticized whatever they could about him. That's just the nature that we live with and the nature that we are. It doesn't have to be. And it can be changed. There are certain considerations that I think all of us need to make. We need to understand. We need to remember that when we are criticized. Next week, Lord willing, as we continue this series, we're going to look at patience and having patience. And so it kind of fits, it flows, if you will, from one to the next. But we have to understand that criticism always is knocking at our door. But as we think about that, we have to understand that criticism comes because the critic believes in what they say. They believe in what they say for several different reasons. Maybe it is the fact that they really believed that they were helping you. Maybe it was due to the fact that they really thought that their way was better. Maybe it was due to the fact that they didn't like the way you did it. Maybe it was just due to the fact that they thought you were just negligent in certain areas, and that their bit of advice, quotation marks, their bit of advice is advice that just would have gotten you over the top. It would have just made it so much better, made you better, made what you did better. Whatever the reason, the critic is always there. And he's always there lurking to tell you where you're wrong and where he's right. The critic believes one thing, if you really stop and think about it. The critic believes he is always right. No matter what they say and what they think. They'll say, they essence in thinking, I am right. And what I do is right. And as much as there's always the critic, we have to ask, why in the world does the critic criticize? Why is it that some folks are more critical than others? Some folks just, it seems like every time something comes out of their mouth, they're critical of it. You know, if it's hot, it's too hot. If it's cold, it's too cold. And if it's rainy, it's too rainy. If it's dry, it's too dry. It doesn't matter. They're critical of it. But why do people criticize? Well, let's think about just some reasons that we won't give an exhaustive list, but there are some reasons why people criticize. First of all, some people criticize to get rid of the victim. In other words, they don't like what others are doing, and so they're going to get rid of the individual that they are criticizing. It wasn't the example that I want to give is not so much an example of criticism as it is just the idea of getting rid of folks that seemingly oppose you. Remember when David went out and fought the giant Goliath, and remember when he came back home, and remember the fact that when they came back home, the ladies were singing this antiphonal song that Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And if you go back and read the book of 1 Samuel, it just appears, at least to me, it appears as if Saul is eaten up with envy, jealousy. He is eaten up with the idea that folks are proclaiming David, this old shepherd that went out and killed the giant Goliath, that he is the great victor and not King Saul. And so what does Saul spend the rest of his days doing? Hunting David to get rid of him. Why? Because he felt like he had been undercut. He felt like he had been shown up as being less than David. And so he wanted to get rid of an individual that seemingly opposed him. Well, that's what the critic sometimes does. He criticizes in order to get rid of the individual to whom they're criticizing. But some criticize for self-righteousness' sakes. In other words, they're right and everybody else is wrong. You remember the story in Luke chapter 18 of the publican and the Pharisee? You remember the story of here's the tax collector and here's the Pharisee. Here's the religious man, the Pharisee, as seen in biblical times. And here's the publican who was seen in biblical times as being the sinner. They're going into the temple to pray. And the Pharisee begins to make a show of it. What does he do? He smotes himself on the breast from the standpoint of showing out. Oh, yes, look how great I am, Lord. Lord, I thank you that I'm not an extortioner, not unjust, not an adulterer, and I'm not even as this publican. The poor publican smotes himself upon the breast, not just hits himself, himself. righteous. Oh, Lord, thank you that I'm not like other men. You see, in essence, even in his actions, he was criticizing poor publican. I thank you that I'm not like him. Some folks criticize because they are, in their own thoughts, righteous and we are not. Some criticize because of self-deceit. We dare not class ourselves as them or compare ourselves to them. They measuring themselves by themselves, comparing themselves by themselves, they're not wise. That's what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. Some criticize because, simply put, they believe themselves to be right, but they have deceived themselves into thinking that they are always right. And they have this deception that everything needs to be compared to me and to my way, to me and to my way of thinking, to me and to my level and standard of justification. And that when you meet my standard, then you're all right. Whereas the reality of it is they keep moving their standard. Some criticize because, simply put, they have deceived themselves into believing that they are right. And then others criticize because they just have not learned to bite their tongue. You know, Solomon reminds us in Proverbs chapter 29. He reminds us there in verse 20 that he says, do you see a man who is hasty in his words? Well, yeah, sometimes you do. Solomon says there's more hope for a fool than for a man that does not, or a man that tastes his words. What do? We need to learn to stop and think. How is this going to make them feel? How is this going to help them? How is this going to benefit them? How is this going to be something that can push them to greater heights? Is this going to push them to greater heights? Is this going to improve them? Is this going to make them better? Is what I'm saying really worthy of their consideration and worthy of my time and effort to put it forward? You see, we always need to think about what we're going to say. We need to think, as the old saying goes, we need to ask, is it true? Is it honest? Is it intelligent? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Lord, think when we speak. Failure to bite the tongue. Some criticize because they simply put, do not measure their words. But then some criticize because they're convinced in their own mind, I'm really helping this individual. I'm really doing them a service. I'm really doing something for them that's going to benefit them, that's going to improve them. And maybe so. We'll talk about that in just a second. But oftentimes the critic is convinced that what I'm saying is helping. What I'm saying is assisting them. And so I'm going to give my criticism and I'm going to give it freely. And then some give really backhanded compliments. I had a lady walk out one time in church, and this doesn't happen as much today as it used to. When I first started preaching, people walk out, oh man, that's a good sermon. I appreciate the sermon. Thank you for your effort. Thank you for what you did this week. That you did a good job. Do-da. You don't, as preachers, we don't hear that much anymore, and that's up to you all, I guess. But yeah, at the same point in time too, I remember one sweet lady walked out one time and she said, you're going to be a good preacher. Okay. Gonna be. Not you are, or not you're halfway there. You're gonna be a good preacher. I was young, admittedly. And now they say, well, you should have been. But anyway, but there are backhanded compliments that are given. And the critic gives that, and he gives that in such a way as to belittle, so as to elevate themselves. Have you ever heard this one? Heard this one lately? Well, that's not bad for an old person. That's not a compliment. That's an insult. But that's what the critic does, a backhanded compliment. So we criticize, and people criticize for various reasons. This is, as I said, not a complete list, but it gives you some food for thought. And you have to ask yourself, am I a real harsh critic? And if I am I an individual that's really hard to live with? And are these some of the reasons why I criticize people? Do I criticize folks in order really to just get onto them and get next to them? Am I really helping? And so we ask ourselves, really, what's the nature of criticism? Is criticism itself destructive or is it constructive? Now, let us understand that part of this is intent, yes. But also, we have to stop and think about how am I delivering the criticism that I am delivering, and how are they receiving the criticism that I'm giving them? Now, we'll talk about that later. But let us ask the question, what's the nature of criticism? Well, criticism destroys. Let's just be honest with it. Criticism destroys. Criticism destroys growth and improvement, doesn't it? Criticism destroys the idea of, well, I want to get better. Why? Because I never can meet the level that the critic wants me to meet. Criticism destroys my growth and improvement because I know that no matter my efforts, no matter how much effort I put forth, no matter how much I do, no matter how much I even try to change, I'm never going to meet their level that they have prescribed for me. And there's going to be something that they're going to find that is a flaw. It might be anything. It might be my grammar. It might be my appearance. It might be my energy. It might be what I say. It could be anything. So criticism often destroys the growth, especially of young, and their improvement. When I started, because I don't know who this is, when I started preaching, actually I was not out of school. I was a kid. I was in high school, and then in college, we had one lady that was Suzanne's first grade school teacher. And she was a sweet lady, and she loved me to death. She did. But she loved to straighten me out, too. And if I gave a little short devotional, there was something wrong with it. One time I gave a devotional, and after the devotional, the invitation was offered. I was standing down front, as preachers do, and she caught me singing, and she said, preachers are not supposed to sing the invitation. They're supposed to look people in the eye. And I said, okay. So what do I do now? I look people in the eye and I sing. I do both. Reality of it is whatever it did, I couldn't, but thankfully I didn't let that sweet lady, because like I say, she did love me. She loved me, but I did not let her stunt my growth. I don't know about improvement, but she didn't stump it. Secondly, criticism can also destroy our ability to see what's good. Criticism can often destroy our ability to see what's good. Do you remember in Mark's 14th chapter, do you remember the story of the lady that came and anointed the feet of Jesus? And do you remember there was one that said, why wasn't this ointment sold and money given to the poor? Do you remember that story? You see, the criticism, well, the woman did a good thing. Remember what Jesus said, she's done a good work. But there was one who was willing to say, something else could have been done. Well, maybe so. But inasmuch as something else could have been done, maybe what she did was the right thing as well. And ultimately, there are many individuals that, simply put, have tried to do good, but they've been destroyed by the critic who just could not see the good that was in what was being done. And so the critic has to ask themselves, is what I'm going to say, is it going to destroy what people are doing, even though they intend for it to be good? And you see, that then leads to destroying good works, just like that woman. Just like the woman that was doing something good for Jesus. How many people have stopped doing what's good because the critic criticized what they were doing? How many people have stopped coming to church because of something that the critic said about the fact, well, you couldn't sit still, you didn't keep your children still, you didn't keep them quiet, or you had on the inappropriate dress, or this, that, or the other. So oftentimes the critic does not see the good work and consequently destroys the good work. Then criticism can destroy a relationship. Why? Because criticism hurts. Criticism, even well-intended criticism, will oftentimes eat at the soul of the individual that receives it. And as that individual receives it, happens, then they want to back off from the relationship. I want to get around them. Why? Because they're going to criticize me. They're going to say something about me. They're going to say something that's going to hurt me. And so if I can stay away from them, I'm going to stay away from them. I'm going to pull myself back from them. Why? Because I am not going to allow them to kill my day. I'm not going to allow them to bring rain into my day of sunshine. I am not going to allow it. And so criticism destroys relationships. But criticism can be constructive. And we ask how? By helping people grow if given correctly. Criticism can help people if it's given correctly, if it's given with a heart of compassion, a heart of kindness, a heart of love, with the intent and with the understanding, hey, here's a thought for you. What you did was excellent, but here's the thought for you. I messed up. When Suzanne and I messed up early in our marriage. Well, I messed up every day, but I messed up early in our marriage. We were sitting at the dining room table. Suzanne had fixed an absolute wonderful meal. Suzanne is a wonderful cook. If y'all hadn't eaten her cooking, y'all should. But Suzanne has always been a good cook, really has. And one night, we hadn't been married too long. We're sitting at the dining room table. We have eaten. We have dined sufficiently. We are full. It is good. It was good. I messed up. I really thought I was going to help. I said, that was really, this is what I said. That is really good. I enjoyed that. Thank you, dear. My mama made it this way. Guess what? 41 years I have not said. My mama made it this way. Never, ever. I was trying to give a little help. You have to be careful. You see, and I even couched it with nice, kind words. Still didn't work. I hurt her feelings. I hurt her. Didn't mean to. And she let me know she was mad. That's all right. Understand that even the best of intentions, criticism hurts. And so we have to ask ourselves, and we have to look from a Christian standpoint, a Christian viewpoint, what can the critic do to be good, successful, and helpful? Okay, what can you do? As if you're the critic, you're going to give out the advice, you're going to give out the criticism. You're the critic now. Here's what you need to do. First of all, you need to know that you don't have all the facts. You just don't. You think you know everything. I've told you about the man that sat in my office one day, not here, but in another congregation. Sat in my office one day and we were talking. He says, I know what you're thinking. And so I said, okay, here's what I'm thinking. And he said, no, you aren't. He thought he knew everything. Some folks think they have all the facts. Do you remember in the story of David and Goliath? Do you remember in 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter? Do you remember that David is a young shepherd boy? David could have been 12 years of age, somewhere in that neighborhood. Some have speculated. We don't know. He was just described as a young shepherd boy. Jesse, his father, comes to him and he says, hey, your brothers are out fighting and I want you to carry them some food. Now I understand, because the king didn't provide food. Families had to provide food for their soldiers, for their folks, their kinfolks that were fighting. And so he says, I want you to take brothers some food. And so when David gets there with his food, he leaves the sheep behind. He gets there with his food like his daddy has sent him. There's a giant 9.5 feet tall outside the camp walking up and down, back and forth, and talking about how terrible children of Israel are. And David wants to know, who is this guy? And Eliab, David's brother, says, I know why you're here. You're here to see a fight. You're here just because you're a nosy. Why did you leave your sheep? Why did you leave your old nasty sheep and come here and bother us? He was so far from getting right why David was there. He missed it. You see, we don't know all the facts. God knows all the facts. We don't know all the facts. And so the critic has to understand, you don't know everything you think you know. Second of all, it's difficult to be impartial, isn't it? The critic usually tries to bolster themselves or their friends while tearing down other individuals. And while we're commanded to be individuals that are to be kind one to another, we have to understand that we have to be impartial. But love shows no partiality. That love is that which is truly fair to all. And criticism is virtually impossible to be impartial. We're going to be partial to our ideas, our thoughts, or to our friends' thoughts and our ideas. And we need to be careful. Why? Because we're told not only will we reap what we sow, Galatians 6, but we're also reminded in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, that golden rule that whatsoever you would therefore that men should do to you, do you even so to them. But the critic has to understand it's difficult to be impartial. But then the critic also has to ask himself, who's really right? Criticism, by and large, is based upon opinion, right? Whose opinion's right? Why is your opinion worth more than mine? Why is your opinion right and mine wrong? Why is your way of doing and your thoughts of doing, why is it right and mine is wrong? In Romans chapter 14, Paul is dealing with matters of indifference. Things that are in the church that really don't matter, that the scriptures haven't said when to say have the Lord's Supper on Sunday, just to have it. Hasn't told us from the standpoint of do you have trays? Do you not have trays? Do you have songbooks? Do you have PowerPoint? Hasn't told us these things. Has told us to sing. Has told us to have the Lord's Supper. Has told us to give. Has told us to pray. Has told us to preach. All in dealing with matters of indifference where the scriptures don't talk about. He asked basically this question: who are you to judge another man's servant? No, not me. Not really. I'm not in that point. So who's right? Paul says, don't judge. You think you can't eat, and this brother thinks you can't eat something? He says, don't judge. See, the critic has to ask himself, well, really, who's right on the issue? And then the critic also must develop a relationship with the individual that they're criticizing. If I don't know you, what your criticism is to me is something that I may consider, but very lightly. Years ago, I had met the boys, teenage boys from a congregation. It was summertime, and so on every Thursday I would meet them at a local pizza place, and we would eat pizza together. And so I one day hurriedly parked in the parking lot, ran in to the building, and there were the boys. And when we had a good time and got out to the car, and there was a note on my car. It says, you need to learn how to park. Between the lines, not very straight, but between the lines. Guess who signed it? It's the famous person, Anonymous. I didn't listen to it. I wadded it up. I threw it away. In order to be very successful as a critic, you need to learn to develop a relationship with individuals. You need to learn to build those people up so that they can trust you, so that they know that what you're saying is in their best interest. And in doing such, you must be sure to praise them as well as criticize them. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11, Paul says, to edify one another, even also as you're doing. He actually says, comfort and edify, even as also you're doing. We need to be individuals that encourage others. Encouragement is what will get us through. Encouragement is what will cause us to move forward. Encouragement is what will build us up. The critic needs to be mindful that they need to encourage. It's been said that it takes a lot longer to get over a criticism than it does to hold on to an encouragement. We need to be mindful. And so the critic needs to beware. But then, what about those that are criticized? What about those that are criticized? Have you ever been criticized? Yeah. We've all been criticized. What do we need to do? Well, if we've ever been criticized, first thing we need to do is pray for the critic. Pray that you enter not into temptation. The spirit's indeed willing, flesh is weak. Jesus reminded those that were going to sleep. Remember when he was in the garden in Matthew chapter 26? We need to pray for the individual. We need to pray for them. Pray for their goodness, pray for their kindness, pray for their heart, pray for their safety, pray for their security, pray for their love, pray that their heart will change. Pray for them. Why? Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be open to you. Everyone that asks receives. To him that seeks find. To him that knocks it shall be open. Matthew 7, verse 7 following. Critic needs to learn to pray, or the individual that's criticized needs to pray for the critic. Secondly, you need to handle yourself so that there are no regrets. What's the first thing we do? We get mad, and what's the first thing we do then? We get angry. We talked about anger last week. See how all these fall in line? We get angry, and then we say and or do something that we later regret. And yet we're reminded in Proverbs chapter 10, we're reminded in verse 19 that in the multitude of words, sin exists. We're reminded then, according to 1 Peter chapter 3, that we're to be individuals that are loving, kind, forgetful, having a good conscience among the Gentiles, that when they speak evil of you as of your good works, that when they see them, what will they do? Peter says they'll glorify your Father